Jane Delaney, and I'm a teacher here at St. Ignatius College Prep. I'm here to talk to you about the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. This is a program that is based on the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. The goals of Jesuit education, in other words, why do we do what we do? Why do we teach? What do we want to convey to our students? Well, first of all, we want them to be open to growth. Now, I might add, we want ourselves to follow these goals also. As Jesuit educators, we're not just talking about students, we're also talking about the kids. And we're also talking about ourselves. So how open to growth are we? The second value we want kids to have, of course, is intellectual competency, which we expect ourselves to have as well. To be lifelong learners, to keep growing, to keep learning more and more information about the subjects that we encounter and teach. Next, of course, we are a Jesuit Catholic university. We want our students to be religious as we should be, and not just cafeteria Catholics, but also individuals who truly believe and practice their religion. We also want our students to be loving. We were talking in one of my classes today about bullying, and I said, as far as I'm concerned, there shouldn't be a bullying program in a Jesuit school. Because if we follow the goals of a Jesuit education, bullying should be non-existent. And finally, we want our students committed to doing justice. St. Ignatius wanted us and encouraged us not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. How do we practice what we preach? Do we have empty words, or do we really put love into action, as Ignatius asked us to be? The spiritual exercises, as you can see here, provide educators with both a goal and a methodology. One of the many things that I have studied in my time at school are how do I give information to the students and how do I have them discover information for themselves? How do I lead them to knowledge? What do I do? What methods do I use? And I felt myself, when I studied secondary education, I had some pretty good, solid information about what I was teaching, about my content area, but I really didn't know how to deliver it. And so when I began my studies in education, which oftentimes I felt were kind of lame courses, I was lucky enough at Loyola University to find some exquisite teachers who really brought me an understanding of the various ways that I can deliver information. Little did I know then, St. Ignatius knew, as Ralph Metz would say. He came to believe that all things are given to persons as a gift when used correctly. And ultimately, all the gifts that we have, which is why people don't need to be arrogant, is they are gifts from God. One's talents and intelligence are gifts from God and should be used for the greater honor and glory of God. This, to me, as an Ignatian educator, is our mantra. This is what inspires me and should inspire all of you to continue on our journey with God to educating young people. The program that I'm dealing with right now, the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, is based on the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. When you would read the spiritual exercises, you would see it's not a novel you pick up and read. It's almost like Ignatius wrote this manual and gave you instructions on how to lead a good life. When you make the exercises, the interaction is between the person who is making the exercises and God. The spiritual director is the facilitator. So too, when we think of the spiritual exercises, we have to think about the life of St. Ignatius, the author. He spent hours of prayer when he was in Manresa, reflection, and he felt then that they led him to self-absorption, what a lot of people call navel-gazing. Okay, how am I related to God? How does this affect me? Oh my God, it's raining out and this affects me how? Okay, and he came to a realization that God brought him to that. Okay, that's called the epiphany, this aha moment that we can experience in our faith journey. And as he says, from the exercises directly, the eyes of his understanding began to open. The exercises are written in the third person. This interior freedom brings about Ignatian indifference. For me personally, this has been a really difficult concept. I find it hard to be indifferent. When I'm driving to school in the morning, I am not indifferent. I actually want to murder the person who's going the speed limit because I'm in a hurry. Okay, when wonderful things happen to me, I'm absolutely ecstatic. What Ignatius said is we need to be indifferent. Not indifferent, I don't care, but to have this idea that God is at work in my life. God is active in my life, which is why we do the wonderful, wonderful examine every Thursday. We take time and we sit back and we look at how does God move in my life. The spiritual exercises, as I said, are guidelines. It's almost like a recipe book. And it's a process directed toward developing our attention toward God and his movement in our lives. And the other thing that's very, very important is discernment, okay? Is this idea of meeting a person where they are. Okay, now we're going to talk about the idea of the IPP, or the Ignatian Pedagogical Paradigm, in connection with the spiritual exercises. Discernment is a Jesuit word you're going to run into throughout your years here in Jesuit education. It's the ability to reflect on the ordinary events of one's life. What's going on in my life, and how do I discern God's movement in my life? That is related to the IPP element of context. I have to know who I'm teaching. I have to know who these kids are. I also have to set up lessons so that they completely understand. If I'm teaching a poem by Percy Bysshe Shelley, they have to understand the Romantic era, the world around Shelley, because he's a mirror. He's reflecting what is going on in his poetry, in his mind, in the symbols that he uses. Thinking about the choices a person considers, repetitive, and can lead us to action and decision making. This is an important integral part of Jesuit education, reflection. In education terms, it's called metacognition. Ignatius knew about this a long time. In other words, reflect about what you are learning. How is the content area, what you're studying, how does that relate to your life? For example, when I was teaching Brave New World, I looked at the kids, and of course, babies are made in test tubes, and there are no mothers and fathers. And I had the kids, I had them write about, in a reflective moment, gee, what if you could design your own child? What would that child be like? And then, what are the consequences of everyone having that ability, or only some people having that ability? So that this became a book not far away from them, but something that certainly is within the world that they will more than likely be confronting. And then, what emotions does this bring about? One of the gifts Ignatius has given us is that these are not just rational human beings sitting in front of us, but there is an emotional element to learning. Okay, think about, a class that you took that you absolutely loved and you really worked hard on it. Why? You had this emotional connection to the material, to the teacher, to how it was presented. And Ignatius recognized that. So when we think in terms of the examen, which we do on Thursdays, you want to think about how that is related to the spiritual exercises. You recall, of course, that we are in the presence of God. You give thanks for the many gifts. This is your context. You examine how you have lived the day. How has God been at work in you? Reflection and evaluation. You ask for forgiveness, and then there is a guidance to act. How am I going to be? How am I going to be better than I was in my previous actions? So, ultimately, the IPP is related to the spiritual exercises. How? The spiritual director leads the retreatant to God. The teacher leads the learner to truth. Now, the IPP. It's an attitude, it's a mentality, and it's an approach to learning and teaching. Now, I have to tell you, you probably have been doing this. You simply haven't put these particular names of the elements on the activities that you have been doing. It's simply good teaching. How do I deliver what is important, what I have discerned that's good for my students to be thinking about, to be learning, to have part of themselves? The spiritual exercises provide us with a model for education. It assumes the Ignatian worldview and suggests to us explicit ways in which Ignatian values are incarnated in our teaching and the learning process. Therefore, through reflection, action, experience, through context, evaluation, the teacher leads the student to truth. It all melds together. A powerful model. Now, what are the main elements of the IPP? The first one is context. Oftentimes, we as in Ignatian education talk about predilection. This is giving the students, here's what we're going to be covering today. I'm sure you all do this. You want to know the student's life, what their experience is. If I have a child who's just suffered the loss of a parent, that kid's going to be dealing with the material I'm teaching in a very, very different way. I need to know that, okay? So I can deal with what the knowledge. Also, how many of us give pre-tests? What do you know already? I know you're not at this empty receptacle coming into my class. What do you know? So then I can build on what they know already. So it's knowing the student, and in knowing the student, understanding the knowledge that they have brought with them, and sometimes the misinformation. Experience refers to us engaging students in getting new information, both in the cognitive area and the affective area. What am I doing? I always say I'm kind of a salesman. I'm selling a product to people who don't want it. What am I doing to convince them to buy the used car? Reflection refraud, which I talked to you about already, refers to drawing meaning from their experiences. What is their experience and how do they relate? It's so easy, I think, for an English teacher. How do you relate to the Canterbury Tales? Well, it's kind of like Jon Stewart. It's kind of like Saturday Night Live. That's kind of what it was like. And then action. What do they do? What has the knowledge they required? How has that impelled them toward activity, toward action? It could be homework. It could be whatever, doing well on a test. It could be what action do they perform? Do they show you? What are their, we used to call them performance activities. How do I know they know? And then finally, evaluation. This is comprehensive. Okay? How do I let them know, and how do they let me know that the lesson has gone well? If everybody in the class fails the test, maybe I better revisit that material. So this is how I learn to become a good teacher and how they learn to learn.